welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to talk about sawfish, aka Bacalao, aka Baccala, depending on where you're from. We're going to get into a little bit of background information about sawfish and what goes into preparing sawfish for cooking. So let's get into it. So sawfish is pretty notorious throughout the Caribbean. In Antigua, sawfish is stewed down or fatted down in a tomato-based sauce. In Jamaica, they do sawfish and ackee. That to me tends to be, at least as far as I've seen, tends to be a lot less saucy, like the sauce is a lot closer. In Trinidad, they do sawfish boujol. I've had roasted sawfish salad in the Virgin Islands and pick up sawfish. You can use sawfish to make sawfish cakes. My mom used to love having stewed sawfish in a tomato-based sauce with mashed potatoes sometimes. Yeah, because everything just went right out of my head. So what do we often have sawfish with? So in some parts of Europe, like Portugal and Italy, sawfish is often included in seafood stews that are cream-based or tomato-based and served with potatoes, or sometimes included in delicious casseroles. I've actually seen Lydia Bastianic prepare a seafood stew that included sawfish and resembled fatted down or stewed down sawfish Antiguan style. So what else is sawfish often served with? Think dukana or dukanu, aka blue jaws in some places. Think kuku, fungi, or I think the closest equivalent here you might be able to think of is polenta, fried dumplings, boiled dumplings, bakes, brown provisions like dashina, cassava or yams, tanya, aka malanga. I've even seen sawfish appear in seasoned rice dishes. And like I told you before, my mom used to have it with mashed potatoes. You can also have sawfish with pumpkin fritters, banana fritters, sweet potato fritters, and all the accompaniments that come with those combos, like plantains, avocados. It is delectable whenever you pair that salty with the neutral or sometimes the sweet. There is nothing like it. So just a little backstory about the process of salting fish and why it even exists. It began in Europe as a way to preserve fish over long journeys and over long periods of time. Salting and drying the fish would ensure that it would last a lot longer. And eventually it made its way to the colonies. I read somewhere some time ago that the fish was initially used as fertilizer, and then they found it to be a cheap protein that they could use as part of the slave diet or as food for slaves. And so that's how it made its way into the diaspora Caribbean diet. So I'll tell you a funny story. When I was younger, I always thought that salt fish or salted fish was actually a fish. No, okay, so it is actually a fish, but what I mean by that is, okay, so you know how you have red snapper or salmon? I actually thought that sawfish was a specific fish. And through the years, of course, as you go, you learn. I came to understand that sawfish can be cod. Sometimes you'll find it in the form of pollock. The one thing I've never understood, and if you are knowledgeable about this, you can drop it in the comments. I know there was always a distinction between saltfish and what some people would refer to as linkfish. I don't know the difference up to this day. I just used to know that whenever I would go to buy salted fish, there were two kinds. There always seem to be two kinds. One that seems to cook really easily. The texture is often very nice. If it has skin on it, the skin is easy to remove. You can just, use your knife, get up underneath there a little bit, and if it's cooked well, the skin will just peel off, and the fish itself boils to sort of a tender, a tender feel. And then there was another kind which, even when you boiled it for the required amount of time, I don't know, the skin and the bones would still always sort of cling to the flesh, and it would be difficult to remove. and that particular one was always very chewy, not enjoyable. I never liked that particular fish that they used. I came to the conclusion that it had to do with the particular fish that they salted. But usually these days you can actually get sawfish in places like Costco. Depending on where you live, depending on the community demographic, you can get sawfish in Costco. And the Costco that I sometimes go to has two types of sawfish. One type, the fish fillets tend to be a lot larger, and those you definitely have to soak overnight. You have to soak them overnight, and then the next day you have to boil it for at least, I'd say at least 3 times to get the flesh tender and to get to the point where just enough salt is removed. The other one, which is my favorite because often I forget to put it to soak, you can soak it overnight, and if you do soak it overnight, you just boil it once the next day, and you should be good. Or if you forget to soak it overnight, you boil it 2 or 3 times. So yes guys, if any of you know the difference between saltfish and lingfish, please share it in the comments. The beauty about spaces like YouTube is that I can share what little I know or have learned through the years, and I get to learn a lot from you guys. So it's funny, my grandma may actually know the answer to that question, but I never really thought about asking her until just right now. But I will ask her, and if she knows, I will drop it in the description box for the benefit of us all. A friend of mine once told me of a little trick that you can employ, especially when you've forgotten to put your sawfish to soak. She said you can add a little bit of sugar to the water, and that helps to temper the salt, and it's worked sometimes. So you could try that if you're ever having to prepare sawfish and maybe you forgot to take it out the night before. You can add a little bit of sugar to hasten the process along a little bit. So the sawfish we'll be using today is boneless. But often when you go to certain markets, you'll find sawfish that has skin on it, that has bones. Maybe I'll do another tutorial, another preparing sawfish tutorial where, karate, where I'll show you how to do that process, which involves a little more, it involves a little more because you have to remove the bones. If you're a person that doesn't want bones at all, some people don't mind a few bones here and there, but if you're a person that doesn't want bones at all, it's a little bit of a process to remove the bones and remove the skin. But I just picked up boneless because it's so much easier. But be aware that even sometimes when they say boneless, there's still little tiny bones, especially if you're planning to give this to a child. There are sometimes still really tiny bones. So the whole idea behind how we prepare sawfish, which you will see, is that once it's soaked, you have to put it to boil. And so my process is I don't usually boil it in the same water I soak it in for a couple reasons. Well, for one main reason, and that is because when you do that, the smell is usually not so pleasant. Now, I'm going to tell you, there is sawfish, there is mackerel, and there's herring. I love the smell of herring when it's cooking, and I love the smell of sawfish when it's cooking. But mackerel, I could never get into the smell of mackerel. And that prevented me from tasting mackerel for a very, very long time until I finally did taste it and thought it was delicious. But the reason you don't want to boil it, well, the thing is it's going to create a smell anyway, and a smell that clings. But to me, that's even more so when you boil it in that water that it's soaked in overnight. So you want to get rid of that water and start with fresh water when you're going to boil it. And you want to boil it maybe 2 to 3 times. I would say after each boil, you pour off the water. Once it comes to a boil, you let it boil for about, I'd say no more than 5 minutes, and you pour off that water and you do a little taste test. And then if it's still very salty, you add more water and boil again and repeat until you get to the place. You don't want to boil out all of the salt. Yes, I know the packaging says 10,000 plus milligrams. You don't want to boil out all of the salt, because the whole idea is you don't want to get to the place where you have to add salt. Unless, of course, you are on a low sodium or no sodium diet and you've acclimated yourself to not having any sodium at all, then I guess you can boil out the salt. For me, I don't really eat sawfish that much anymore, but if I'm preparing something for someone, or if I am making, let's say, fish cakes or some other sawfish dish for someone, I do at the end of it sometimes taste test. I mean, you gotta taste test what you're cooking for someone else. That's just me. I know some people don't do that or feel the need to do that, but that's just me. So yes, we're gonna get into it in a minute. This is what we'll be using today, and it's called boned salted pollock. It's also skinless. It's wild caught, and I just picked it up at my local supermarket. All right, so we've opened the pack, and this is what it looks like on the inside. And we're gonna just rinse this and set it in a pot of water to soak for about maybe an hour. Ideally, like I said before, it's best to soak this overnight, but sometimes you forget. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright guys, so I just kind of let it sit for a minute how I rinse, and then I just pour off the water. Just so you guys know, I washed my hands already. For those of us who think that, you know, the 10 minutes you see is all there is. And I'm basically going to just put more water on there. Now you could, if you had, you could rinse this in a colander, so that, is that the right way to say that word? A colander, so that you wouldn't have to keep like adding water, pouring it off. And in that case, if you were using a colander, whatever, you could just hold the fish over and just rinse the salt off. Just want to get rid of that excess salt. Helps the process move a little faster. And so I'm just going to add the water that is going to boil in for the first boil right now. Well, actually, it's not going to boil in this water because we don't use the water we soak in to boil in. So, like I said before, so we're just going to add this water to it and let it soak for about an hour. This fish looks like it may not even need to soak overnight. And if I soaked this overnight, I would kind of taste test it after one boil to make sure, you know, it's just right, rather than just throw off the water and boil again and potentially lose all the saltiness. Then we're back to square one. So we're gonna let this, we're gonna basically let this soak for about an hour, and we'll be back.
1 hour later.
So we're gonna pour off our soaking water. And we're gonna add fresh water. Not that much, so I don't want to like kill it with water. I think that's about enough. There you go. And we're gonna put this to boil and bring it to a boil, and then check it. And if it's still salty, then we may do another boil. But something tells me, just from the texture of that fish, 1 to 2 boils should be enough. So first boil is over, and I almost feel like it doesn't need to be boiled anymore. There you go. But I'm going to taste test it once I remove that. Just pour it off in the colander, whatever. So guys, it turns out that an hour's soak and 1 boil was enough for this particular brand of saltfish. I'm not gonna boil it again, because if I do, then literally all the salt will be gone. You can also see that it flakes really easily. That's another way to tell if you've gotten to where you need to be. Maybe you can't see, but You see that? You can also tell by the fact that it flakes really easily. That's another way of telling that you've gotten to the point where you can stop boiling. So I'm just gonna let that cool, and then we are going to chip it up into really small pieces. It's washed, and we're going to chip up our sawfish in preparation for whatever it is we're making. So if you are going to make, say, fish cakes, you would want to not just chip this up, but literally kind of shred it. Or if you have a food processor, you could just toss it in the food processor with your other ingredients and pulse it until you get to the consistency of the mix that you're looking for. But we're not doing fish cakes. I'm not going to tell you what we're doing or what this is for as yet, but you'll see maybe 1 or 2 videos out. So basically you just want to chip the sawfish into smaller pieces, smaller, more bite-sized pieces, and remove any bones that you may find. This is supposed to be boneless, but like I said, sometimes even the ones marked boneless will have small bones in them. If I find a bone, there you go. So here's a bone right here, and it's not even a small one. So I just toss that into the sink until I'm done, and we just keep doing that. See, there's some more small ones. You don't want to do it too small, because okay, see, if you're stewing it, what you will find sometimes happens, especially with sawfish that flakes that easily, is that if you're not careful, then it breaks apart into even smaller pieces that you don't want. So I feel like these pieces are fine, at least for now. And you can do, like, let's say you have to prepare this and you want to prepare it in advance, you can actually do this. And once you get to this step, you can take this and put it into a Ziploc bag and freeze it. And then maybe the night before you want to, say, prepare it, you take it out and rest it in your refrigerator to defrost there, and then you can just use it for whatever preparation you had in mind the following day. Do not defrost it at room temperature. That's a no-no. But yeah, you can freeze bacalao, you can freeze sawfish. I have done it and it works fine. The other thing I wanted to say is that if you buy sawfish, let's say you're unfamiliar. I mean, the people who are familiar, the people who know. But if you're unfamiliar and you buy sawfish and you're trying to figure out where's the best place to store it, it's a cool, dry place. But I found, especially during the summertime when it's really hot, I have just put my packages in the fridge, because I remember one instance I had left it out and then the salt melted and formed this pool of liquid, and then yeah, that's disgusting, and then it doesn't smell too pleasant either. So the best thing to do if you're in a situation where you're not sure is to keep it refrigerated. Doesn't harm to keep it in your refrigerator at all. If you have a cool, dry place where you can store it, though, that's also fine. But once you cook it, especially if you're not going to use it right away to prepare whatever it is you had in mind, freezing is an option. So we're done. There's not much of anything left in there. I see one little tiny bone, and you see the bones can be really, really fine. I know people who won't eat sawfish at all because they're afraid of things like this. Let's wash hands. Alright, so this is what we have. And I feel like there's a couple little tiny bones in there that I'll eventually get around to fishing out. But I mean, if you're not afraid of a little bone here and there, like I said, if you're not preparing it for kids, it's okay. But if you're preparing it for kids who don't like bones, or you're afraid of maybe them swallowing a bone, you can go back through and just make sure you've gotten rid of all the really tiny ones. And that is it. That's how you prepare sawfish to cook, to make whatever it is that you want to make with it. You have to remove the salt and boil it, and usually chip it up, depending on what you make. Maybe even you might not chip it up this small. So thanks guys for watching. That's it. Until next time, see you later.
Get a drum as a toy for Christmas.